Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, Viewing Architectural Fees Through the Lenses of Scope, Value, and Risks. My name is Shalika Sivathasan, and I am the Administrative Assistant in the Continuing Education Department at the OAA. We will begin today's webinar by acknowledging the land on which we are meeting and calling in from. For millennia, the place we call Ontario has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples and nations who have been stewards of the land and who are deeply connected to its rich cultural and natural landscape. We would like to invite you in a moment of reflection to acknowledge our shared responsibility to address past and present injustices and provide space for Indigenous knowledge and worldviews to shape the architectural landscape of Turtle Island. Before we begin, I would like to share some important information to ensure an effective and professional webinar experience. Please be informed that this session is being recorded for quality and educational purposes. For accessibility, we provide automated closed captioning service available in multiple languages to accommodate the needs of our diverse audience. In order to maintain a stable internet connection, we have muted all participant microphones and disabled video feeds. Kindly note the chat function has also been deactivated. However, we do highly encourage engagement through our Q&A window, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit any questions you have for our speaker there. Questions will be addressed during the designated question and answer period at the end of the presentation. For those seeking continuing education learning hours, please note that attendance is crucial. A minimum of 80% attendance is required for these hours to be accredited to your OAA transcript. Please just allow a few weeks for the processing and reporting of these hours. And lastly, please note that the presenter does not provide insurance, legal, or practice advice, and the OAA does not bear responsibility for errors or omissions in discussions during the webinar. Now, I'm excited to introduce our speaker for today's session, Yew-Thong Leong. Yew-Thong has been a practicing architect for 4 decades and is a regular speaker on professional practice topics at architectural conferences both nationally and international. He is an RAIC advisor to professional practice, and in this role, he sits on the RAIC's Fees and Procurement Committee, as well as being the current Dean of the RAIC College of Fellows. For the OAA, Yew-Thong developed the Fundamentals of Running a Practice course, where he also presents the module on marketing and the module on organizational behavior and leadership. So please join me in welcoming Yew-Thong Leong.
Good morning. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm going to cycle through a few things rather rapidly, and then a few things I will slow right down because the theme within those slides are pretty important. So my topic today is more of a refresher looking at how we determine architectural fees by looking at scope, value, and risk, and essentially try to decouple ourselves from relying on the guides, the fee guides, the fee tables that are out there. I have found that those are rather two-dimensional, and sometimes they are very important things that we may miss. Not to suggest for a moment that those fee guides are not important. I'm actually specifically referring to the RAIC guide. It's a very thick document, and most of us just gravitate towards looking at the charts and the tables and essentially ignore the rest of the content. And I like to believe that today we can actually redirect our attention towards some of those at the back of the guide. And of course, a lot of the content over here are my own. I take full responsibility for it. Those are lessons that I've learned over the last 40 years of experience and mistakes that I've made. And then putting some emphasis towards wholeheartedly looking at fees the proper way in my opinion. And I'll try my very best to convince the audience today that this is the right way for doing it. So very quickly, introduction, learning objectives. As I've said a moment ago, we're going to look at scope, value, and risk. but in the context of professional practice and the business of architecture. In my opinion, certainly in the context of this particular session, I look at architecture as a professional practice and offering our professional services and solutions to the public at large. I am not wearing my academic hat today. I'm not going to be talking too much about the theory and the history of architecture and all those nice things, but I will instead be focusing on how architecture should be practiced. I also want to kind of go through a bit of the history of the fee scales. Nothing really happened without a good reason, and I'm going to trace us back to the 19th century and look at why we have the scales. And over the years, we've forgotten, and now we have to kind of remind ourselves why they existed in the first place. And of course, our most favorite topic as architects, the complaints about low fees and all those kind of things. And on certain days, I would contend that sometimes we are victims of our own manufacture. So I'm hoping that today's session will actually get us out of that mindset. And of course, the OAA has been advocating something called reasonable and fair fees in the practice of architecture as well as the business of architecture. I'm going to revisit some of those things, and then, of course, some of the points that I want to bring forward are actually my own. Just a bit of context, I've spent the last 10, 15 years focusing very much on professional practice. In fact, I have a sabbatical coming up next year, and I'm just going to be focusing entirely on all of those things. I've been teaching that subject, talking about that subject. In the last year or so, I've been collecting a lot of data and research and statistics around the quantitative aspects of our practice, focusing quite a bit on fees, economics, and factors like that. So I like to believe that I'm coming from a wealth of accumulated knowledge that are out there, and I'm kind of helping you pull this all together. So today's topic, I'm going to be talking about 4 key themes. Initially, starting with preamble, we need some context, we need some history. And then we're going to go back and examine those fees tables that I talked about. They're still useful, just to be sure that there's no misunderstanding, but cannot be the only tools to help us determine fees. And you will hear from me later on about the complexity of practice these days in comparison to 100, 150 years ago. And I want to spend quite a bit of time focusing on scope, value, and risk. I'm going to break them down, and I'm going to put them towards a relational diagram, essentially a Venn diagram, which you'll see in a second. And then come back and say, okay, what's the best way to kind of move forward? And I'm going to touch a little bit on AI, and it'll be obvious why I want to do that. So preamble. There are a lot of myths that are out there, and one of the ones that I keep hearing, and I've been hearing this for the last 40 years, is that architects are underpaid. And this is a good time to bring it up. I like to debunk that. To be honest with you, I was part of that group that actually believed that, and then over the years, it didn't add up. So like I said, about a year ago, I started looking into some statistics, collecting some facts and data, and basically arrive at 2 conclusions. One I will state over here. The second one I would not put in writing, but I will talk to it very briefly. So this is the entry-level median salary for, I looked at a few professionals. And when I talk about professionals, I really meant licensed professionals, as in you and I, engineers, those in the medical profession, doctors, dentists, accountants, specifically CPA, and of course lawyers. To me, those are the five noble professions, meaning society has decided that they will give us monopolistic power to practice what we do for the sake of the good of society. So here is something from a freshly minted engineer who has finished his or her degree, completed internship, and wrote all their professional licensing exam, and this is 96,000-ish. Lawyer, 105, not surprising. They tend to get paid a little bit more. And then here is that surprise. Architects are median above lawyers. And of course, we always pale by comparison to those in the medical profession because they deal with life and death. And the way things are in Canada, we have socialized medicine and on and on. I'm not here to debate that, but I want to debunk that myth that architects are poorly paid. At least at the very beginning of our career. And of course, by comparison to the average Canadian and the average Ontarian, we almost make twice as much. Now, my second comment, I would not put it in writing, although this is recorded. In my opinion, anything beyond licensure is on you. If you don't succeed later on in your career, you have to go back and examine why. And there are tons and tons and tons of courses out there that actually help an architect become a better architect, to become much more productive financially, and on and on and on. And if you've not been looking at those tools that enable you to do your job better, then my contention always is that it's on you. And if you've not done it, I don't feel that you have the right to kind of complain, in my opinion. Like I said, this is not the opinion of the OAA, this is just purely my opinion. The second myth I want to debunk is that fee guides are antitrust, meaning they're anti-competitive, and there's zero truth in that. And here is a bit of a quasi-legal opinion. Anything that has a complex multivariable, in terms of there are lots of permutation and combination, it's very hard for any government or lawyer or public prosecutor to say that we are colluding and they are creating a monopolistic situation. So as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing wrong with fee guides. There's nothing wrong with calculators that are out there. Keeping in mind that I just talked about this a moment ago, that architects actually have a monopolistic license. It's a restricted practice, and we need to be mindful of that all the time. We are the only class of people, other than BCIN in Ontario, that actually have monopolistic practice capability. And of course, always we need to keep in mind that the provincial associations are regulators. They are there to protect the public, but we have an out. We have another venue, which is an advocate to the REIC at a national level. And hence, the REIC had no issues of publishing that particular guide. That's not seen as monopolistic. And it's been around since, I believe, 2019-ish, more than half a decade, and the REIC has never been challenged. So I want to debunk those two. And I also want to stop right here for a moment and allow a quiz to be administered. Is that possible?
Hi, Yew-Thong. Just to let you know, the poll is up currently.
Okay, thank you. I can't see anything.
Oh, okay. Yew-Thong, can you see the results?
No, I cannot. Should
Okay.
I try? Do you mind reading it out to me?
No problem. Yes, I can read them. So we have 45% who have voted newly licensed architects are the lowest paid amongst all the licensed professionals.
Mm-hmm.
20% have voted architects have a high degree of monopolistic market shares in the building design sector. 12% have voted fee guide/calculators based on business principles considered competitive and legal. And 22% have voted the OAA's primary role is to act as a regulatory body to protect and serve the public interest.
Okay, good. Thank you. So at least some of those points have been driven through, which is great. So I'm going to move on. And the whole idea of the quiz is to kind of drive home certain key points. So I'm going to move on now and talk about some of the gaps, some of the facts, that we kind of work within. GDP is the gross domestic product of an economy, and in this particular case, I'm referring specifically to Canada. And we want to be mindful of this. We want to be mindful of this because of the economic workplace or the economic place space that we are within. So GDP distribution is one of those key indicators on the lay of the land, for the lack of a better word, economic activities. And these are statistics that I managed to kind of gather over time, like I said, the last year or so. In the Canadian economy, 80 to 85% of the activities that we participate in are actually solutions to problems that we have, and I'll break that out in a second. Artistic expressions would be 3 to 6%, and this would be things like artwork, sadly, music, and anything that is artistic expression. The economy has a very low recording of that as an economic activity. And then here's something interesting. This is a very recent phenomenon, maybe about in the last 20 or 30 years. There's this thing called a creative economy, where we are actually trying to take artistic expressions and turn them into a form of economic activity, where we can monetize things. So we're talking about things like gaming is a good example. Games are highly creative, also extremely artistic, and they are people that are trying to kind of monetize those, and they're in the 10, 15. There was a promise that this would trend up and higher, but it hasn't really gone beyond the 10 to 15. I've been watching those statistics, and this may be the plateau. So what are problem-based solutions? Fundamental to human needs, safety and logistical efficiency. And this is where architects are needed. We are not needed because of our amazing design abilities. Most clients do not appreciate. I'm not saying for a moment that this is not important. I'm just saying clients hire us to solve some problems, and they need, as a matter of fact, as part of their operation, as part of their economic activities. So we always need to understand that. So we are in this play space that represents 80 to 85% of the economic activity of Canada. Artistic expressions are pure creative industries where the prime value is cultural, aesthetic, or symbolic. And again, I'm not knocking it. I'm just simply relating the facts to you. So please do not shoot the messenger. And because I teach, I often a little bit interested in seeing my colleagues coming up with very novel projects that really have no real life value. So my question: when was the last time we designed a museum in Bilbao? One person only. I've never designed a museum. I'm not saying that my shortcoming is a reflection of what most architects do, but I'm just saying this is representative of the economic activities that are out there. And then, of course, this promise of the creative economy. In fact, U of T, the MBA program has pivoted quite strongly about 20 years ago towards that, but I don't think it has bore fruits. So artistic expression is used to solve functional problems, the hybrids on the modern innovation. So this is a pivot and a dream, as far as I'm concerned, still. And if you remember the hype around the metaverse about 4 or 5 years ago, people are actually buying "quote unquote" real estate in the metaverse in the millions of dollars. And the sobering reality is that the metaverse is nobody goes there anymore. Anyway, I just want to kind of emphasize the play space that we are working within. So, in the name of, I believe it's Ralph Gretzky, Wayne Gretzky's father. I could be wrong. Don't remember the first name. He said to Wayne, "Skate to where the puck will be." In other words, be in the play. I'm going to skip quiz number 2 because I'm looking at the clock and I'm running a little bit behind where I want to be. I'm going to move on now to fees tables. So this is topic number 2. And trace a bit of that history. Like I said earlier on, late 19th to mid 20th century, the RIBA and the AIA, like it or not, those are the 2 biggest architectural associations globally. They issued mandatory fee tables to ensure fair compensation. Listen to this: prevent cutthroat competition. Nothing new. It's been around for a little while. Competition has been around for a little while. And of course, the constant strive to maintain high standards of service. So those fee scales were there not because of antitrust, but to actually prevent the deterioration of the level of services. And of course, there are always pretenders to the throne that would claim that they can do this, but they're not really well qualified for that. So the RIBA and AIA, on top of licensing, also introduced fee tables. It served its purpose. And then in the mid-20th century, the shift from mandatory to recommended started taking place, partly because the global economy was becoming a little bit more competitive, and there's a disdain for monopolistic practices. So architects, most professional bodies actually face the pressure of fair trade practices. So in 1998, in the UK, they basically prohibited professional bodies, not just us, but all bodies across the board, from setting fixed fees and to stop publishing binding fee scales to avoid colluding on prices. So of course the Americans followed suit, and so did Canada. Globally, right now, I can at this moment think of only 2 countries that actually have mandatory scale. Malaysia, my birth country, and Germany, a country that I actually visited quite frequently at one point, where I would spend a month of a year teaching out there. And I know both countries quite well, so we cannot really say, oh, they have it good over there. There is a whole bunch of other contexts that could be a subject of another webinar, another time, looking at why they have what they have. I always argue that you cannot have narrative without context. So let's just not look at Malaysia and Germany and say, oh, they have it good over there. Different scenario. And the evolution of fees have been driven, and here's the main thing, by increasingly complex projects, which greater flexibility than a simple table. A table is 2-dimensional. They don't really talk about some of the fine level details and the nuances of a building or even the practice. And if you kind of go back 100 150 years, the technology that we had back then in terms of environmental systems, wall systems, sustainability, it wasn't simply there. So the idea of having a simplistic table made a lot of sense, but certainly not today. So I'm going to kind of give you a bit of a highlight of what is happening today. And I already mentioned the RAC guide, the 2019 guide, and I want to emphasize that it's not just tables that are back in the guide. There's a whole bunch of really amazing materials that help you cycle through some of the tips on how to come up with a fee, determining a fee. And of course, this webinar is going to capture most of it. I wouldn't say all of it, but most of it, at least the ones that I think are important. So what is happening currently is that we're moving from single static table of percentages to a flexible guide that factors in project risk. We have professional clients now, technology, CAD, BIM, and now AI. This year is the golden age of AI. Now is the time to jump in, or you miss that trend. Not just technology-wise, but also financially. We've done a couple of projects using AI, and the margins have been pretty amazing. And of course, procurement methodologies in Canada, the most recent one, well, recent as in the last decade or two, P3. And a simple, single, static table of percentages doesn't quite cut it as far as I'm concerned. There are just far too many variables in terms of what affects and how fees are affected. And I'm going to cycle through some of those. At the end of the day, we are very human resources driven. So this bottom-up calculation is very, very important. In fact, this is one of the methods that I will be advocating, but not specifically on just coming up with numbers and hourly rates and our consultants' costs, but a concept called work breakdown structure. And I'll get to that in a second. Not to teach it, but to kind of point out to you the importance of WBS. And we still should have those percentage-based charts as a check, because the RAIC and of course previously OAA had spent tons of hours, and I know this because I was on the CHOP committee, and I am aware of the amount of work that had gone into the RAIC fees guide. It's based on historical information. The proportioning of project complexity is very, very useful still. So at my practice, I still use it as a check, not as the only way to determine that. And people that do, I have a word of caution for them, and I'll get to that in a second. And there are multiple project types and complexity these days in comparison to back then. So we need to understand complexity effects fees as well too. There's some percentages over there. And those are data and research that we've compiled. I'm just sharing them. And it's always a range, it's never a fixed point, because the data set that we have is basically a range. So architects have learned how to price projects according to complexity, which is what I'm trying to say. Service scope, we have since, at least in Ontario, have quote-unquote deregulated full scope. And our insurance predominantly seems to be okay with that. At one point, there used to be a minimum, as an example, contract administration visits. I believe it was 4 at one point, and now it's not even a requirement. If you can write into your contract, and if something happens during construction, quote unquote, you're relieved from those responsibilities. And partial services, I think, is very, very good, because sometimes an architect is only needed for certain things only. And I don't want to be corny, but sometimes when I go to McDonald's, I only want to have their fries and nothing else. I don't want their burgers. I don't want their apple pie. I just want to have their French fries. In my opinion, they make the best French fries. And then the concept of fair and reasonable fees. The OAA emphasized over and over again that bidding excessively low fees can undermine quality and sustainability for the profession. In fact, Prodamity, anecdotally, what I've heard, I've not really kind of gone down that pathway yet, that low fees often lead to legal issues because we weren't able to service the project properly. I would go one step further. I don't think it's just low fees. It's also the responsibility of the architect to kind of communicate better what the fee would cover or not cover. And I'll talk about that in the context of risk in a second. Value-based, emphasis the value of design. This is something I'll be spending some time talking about. There is actually a factor that you can apply based on the perception of value. And I've covered that in one of my fundamentals of running a practice course in marketing. A good example, just to throw this out at you, is Starbucks versus Tim Hortons, almost double in price. So the perception of value is why we pay double that price. And in the context of today's session, I will actually go through some of those things as well too. Negotiation. Fees can always be negotiated. Sometimes I don't call them negotiation, I call them clarification. Client always have their assumptions, their prejudices. If you don't sit down with them and talk to them and just simply flip a letter over to them and say, this is it, take it or leave it, that's not good business practices, not good. When you don't negotiate, it's really not good business practices. And sometimes I see that as arrogance as well too. Leading now to something called a fee calculator. So the latest trend for the last 5 to 10 years is moving away from a fee schedule or a table with the availability of computers. We can actually handle very large data sets and almost on the fly can come up with a fee based on certain parameters. So the RIBA in the UK actually has a service called the RIBA fee calculator. It's no different than the RAIC cost calculator, except one deals with construction costs, which is what the RIC has provided. If you're an RIC member, you should go online and check it out. It's a pretty powerful tool. And my committee at the RAIC, Fees and Procurement, not me, but the committee has came up with that and launched it, I think, about 6-7 months ago. Wonderful, wonderful tool. So the RIB fee calculator is also, RIBA, sorry, is also one of those wonderful tools. Sadly, unless you're an RIBA member, you won't have access to that. But having said that, there are quite a few commercial ones that are out there, and I'll give you those names as well too. Incidentally, the slides I provided to OAA, you can actually ask them to have it sent to you. And I believe this is also going to be put on to YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. Benchmarking, we have that in at the RAIC. RIBA provides a similar service as well too. Ours is $250, and you can for that fee you can actually download a copy of that, and they actually give you a sense of where you are in the marketplace in terms of salaries, revenue, expenditure, profit, and you will very quickly discover whether you're running a tight shop or you are losing money because of certain reasons, and that requires a bit of analysis. As I pivot towards the end of my career, I've been pivoting towards management consulting, and I've been able to actually advise a few architecture firms, and very enlightening to see how some practices are running their practice. Anyway, benchmarking, very important. So now I'm going to jump into the third, second last topic, which is the core reason why we are here today, to talk a little bit about scope, value, and risk, and their interrelationship. So we'll start with a Venn diagram. So S stands for scope. I'm just going to talk about what scope is at a high level. Essentially, we want to define scope of services because it looks after our costs and profits. If we fail to include something in our scope of delivery, we would fail to actually account for it through our fees, and therefore that cost and the potential profit that come out of the activity would be missed. And I had mentioned deliberately a moment ago that I am pivoting towards management consulting this late in my career. And I have seen gaps after gaps after gaps, and they couldn't explain why. So missing scope is a very serious issue. Next one is value. And I had mentioned that I talk about value and value proposition in the fundamentals of running an architectural practice course in my module on marketing. And what is value? Value is our brand. And I don't mean it brand as in there's a logo and there's a slogan and we are advertising in the back of a bus. That's not what I'm trying to say. That's the reputation that you have by word of mouth, or they recognize you based on your portfolio, based on your webpage. So that's one part of value. And of course, the quality of service, as in we sign a contract and we delivered that service plus white gloves. And that value, and if you've taken my marketing class, it allows us to have a certain status. And in the context of fees, it allows us to charge quite a bit more by reputation, believe it or not, because perception is we create value, and therefore a client is willing to pay a little bit more. And in my marketing class, I talk about fear, and clients, all of us are willing to pay a little bit more out of fear because we feel that we can buy some insurance from spending that little extra. I've quantified those, and I'm sharing some of those numbers with you today. It's a range again. And the last diagram in this Venn diagram, the last circle in this Venn diagram is R, as in risk, or risk. There are factors that erode our fees, things that go bad. And as a result, we are doubling back to try to solve that problem. And when we are doubling back and spending fees that we had earmarked for something else that we still have to do, it prevents us from making a profit. It erodes our fee and it eats into our profit. So that, in my opinion, when we generate or determine a fee, we have to consider all of these three broad categories. So the FX, I'm not a mathematician. The X is your fee. The F is actually not fee. It simply means a functional equation, part of a formulation. So I'm trying to be mathematical without knowing anything about math. This is cute. This is a symbol that we can all kind of remember. And if you want to get a tattoo of this, please do so. And I like icons. I like symbols because it reminds us of things. And the three circles represent the relationship between each other. Maybe the size of those circles and the overlap may be different. But nevertheless, like I said, this is an icon. So I want to jump into scope, value, and risk as a formulation. So fees are complex formulation and deserve some intellectual vigor beyond looking at a two-dimensional table in a few minutes. And I'm not kidding you when I say a few minutes. I've worked with people, senior partners, where they would just look at a chart and say, okay, that's the number, we go in with that, without thinking through the complexity of the project and all the other scope and risks associated with it. And suddenly they do not see the value in what they do. It's just simply selling a commodity. Very, very dangerous. And I've seen this over the last 40 years. I don't do that. I do break everything down and I spend time on it. I am what I call not intellectually lazy. Two-dimensional table in a few minutes doesn't quite cut it when it comes to fees, because it determines a lot of things for you downstream. Fees are essentially the final financial resource for you to fund your creativity, and that's the engine. So coming back to this over here, scope. How do we define scope? There are three key ways to do that, and it sounds simplistic, but it's not. Okay, I'm glossing over this only because it's not the topic of my discussion. I'm talking about this at a much broader level. But the work breakdown structure is one of the most important tools that we have in our toolkit in terms of keeping us in business and customer satisfaction. There was a really amazing manual written maybe 20 odd years ago by a gentleman called David Stone. It was actually commissioned by the OAA, believe it or not, back 25 years ago, called Mastering the Business of Architecture. That is one of the best tools that the OAA has ever commissioned, in my opinion. I refer to it constantly, partly to remind myself on how to do a proper architectural work breakdown structure, but also I like to teach this to my students. The physical copy is impossible to procure now, but the OAA actually has a digital scan version that you can download, and I highly recommend that you do that. It's a little bit difficult to download it because they broke it into little chapters. And then you have to reassemble it, but it's a good resource that you have to have. In fact, for your licensure and also for your exact exams is one of the reading requirements. So WBS basically break a project down to specific phases. So in our case, schematic design, blah, 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 and then into individual tasks within those phases that you have to do. And the WBS is actually very good because it actually helps you with scheduling as well too. Those of us that are from the older generation, there is a scheduling methodology called critical path method, CPM, and they come out of the work breakdown structure. And I had to learn that when I was 40 years younger. Anyway, wonderful, wonderful tool. Highly recommend that we make it second nature to our thinking. Once we have those activities, we can assign hours to them. And then at the same time, the way WBS work and scheduling work is that we can also assign personnel as well too. And from there, we can actually price it, billable rates. So a principal is worth a lot more versus an intern who is a lot less. And from there, you can build up your fee. So I cannot emphasize enough defining the scope of work. It's also a contractual thing that you have with your client. You can actually put this into your contract as an appendix. WBS is this catch-all tool, for the lack of a better word. Like I said, it covers your costs and your profit. And it can also help you if you're a much more established practice or you're a very seasoned practitioner. You can actually use that to leverage technology and expertise and experience, and therefore you can kind of price scope something a little bit faster than perhaps your competitor, and win the job. So WBS, defining scope using WBS allow you to actually cover all of those things. I want to kind of pause and emphasize the importance of that. Very important. If you want to get a second tattoo, this will be the one. And once you've done it once, you don't ever have to worry about starting from scratch over again, because a lot of the information that I captured within are historical data. For example, if you are used to certain building types and you have repeat clients, those historical data are actually very, very useful. It becomes part of your IP of your practice. Good news is there are a lot of apps out there. So I've given you this list, and I'm not going to go through them. You can take a screenshot of this or a picture of this, or you can request for this set of slides and research them yourself. The bad news is that you have to populate all the data within the task, the phases, the hours, and the billable rates. But the good thing is it's all automated. Next one is value. This is something I want to put some attention to, and I'm looking at my clock. We've got 15 minutes left. I'm on schedule. Shakila and Ashley, if you're concerned. So value, what do I mean by value? Architects are in the solutions business. That's what we do. Otherwise, there's no reason to hire us. It's not because we are good looking, because we dress smart, because we drive fast cars. None of those reasons. They hire us because of the schooling that we've gone through, the experience that we may have. and our ability to actually bring solutions to our clients' problems. So we must always push the idea of value out there to our client. This is not going to go over too well. Some of us will complain in your Q&A later on that, oh, but there's too much to ask. I'm sorry, don't apologize for this. So I'm going to go through some of this qualitative aspect of value. In this particular case, this is something that you have to have. Our project has a financial and asset value impact. So we have to always be keeping in mind that we want to increase the property value of our projects. We want to minimize construction costs. So don't come with some detail that are really poorly detailed and impossible to construct from a sequencing point of view, and very, very expensive. We want to also think about operational maintenance costs for our client, and we also want to deliver the projects pretty quickly. Now, some of you are already moaning, that's too much to ask. I'm sorry. No, that's what they're getting paid to do. I'm going to add to it. Performance, metrics, space efficiency. I've seen tons and tons and tons of buildings designed by very, very famous architects that are spatially inefficient. And they don't add, when the space is inefficient, they don't add to revenue generation, and as a result, productivity and retention gains are not there. And we are paid to do those kind of things. And again, I do not apologize for this. And last but not least, we are hired because our clients have fears of certain things. And our job is to help them manage those risks in compliance with certain things. So we want to make sure that there are as minimal errors as possible when we're not promising perfection. And clients want to have some degree of compliance certainty, as in the building code, the application process for a building permit, and on and on and on. That's what we are paid to do. Again, I do not apologize for this. We have to think about quantifying value, as in, at the very least, be able to speak that language, be able to kind of address those things like return on investment. Clients are always thinking about those kind of things. Even non-profit clients are concerned about the investment of value, investment of time and human resources onto their projects. Total cost of ownership, okay, nonprofit cares about that, because if you have a very inefficient or very difficult to maintain building, they're not going to be too happy. And of course, value-based pricing, and I'm going to talk about that next. So moving forward to the quantitative, and these are based on data that we pulled together. If you have a very specialized set of expertise, there can be an expertise premium attached to it. And we can increase the value by 20 to 30% without even having to worry about scope. If you have that expertise, leverage it. If you have the people within your organization that can bring a certain expertise to the project, use that, bring that person on board. Speed of delivery and innovation. So BIM has been helping us quite a lot in terms of coordinating with clients and bringing a project faster to the market. That sadly has been normalized now. So BIM is a matter of fact. But there's always the new technology that comes along, and I had mentioned AI. We are really at the golden age of AI right now. And sometimes they can justify, there's a lot of hype around it. They can justify an upfront fee. And based on our research, 10 to 20% extra. And some of these are actually experiences that I've had. And I mentioned 2 or 3 projects that I've had using AI. Smart scope, how we position ourselves. This is that Starbucks versus Tim Hortons. And smart scope is basically scope creep in a good way, as in the upselling. So there was a joke in the 80s, do you want some fries with that? That was a McDonald's slogan. When you get a burger, they will try to upset you. This is before value meals. They want to make sure that you buy their fries. So smart scope is about actually upselling our client. When you're at a checkout counter and you see all these little bubble gums and little small little things that you can pick up, that's upselling. And architects should really be prepared to that. We come on the project and it's like, oh, the program is not quite done yet. All that you've given me is a half a page. sell them the service of actually programming the project for them. Get on board early on and sell pre-design services, planning services. So market positioning is very, very important. So I've kind of talked to it already, so I'm going to skip to some of these points. The key thing is we need to be extremely proactive. Instead of jumping straight to design, we can say, hey, you don't have this brief over here. Let's just do a deeper dive. And you can do it for free if you want, and that really brings value to bring some value proposition to your client. Or basically, if it's really onerous, charge a fee for it. He said, I'm going to kind of dive down into this a little bit for you, but we can actually go deeper. We can actually help you with your furniture. Oh, by the way, we offer interior design, blah, 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 blah. Risk anticipation, identify early on to your client that you would have some potential pushback from whatever, from the market, bad time to go out for tender, or going to OLT, or what used to be the old OMB, highly risky. Maybe you should not consider doing that. So maybe you're better if you are compliant as of right. And then if you are inclined, like I am, with generating financial numbers, say, hey, not going taller simply means you have less construction costs to worry about, and your return on investment may be about the same, percentage-wise. And then the savings that you may have can be leveraged for another project. And that's the management consulting side of my practice. Value-driven fees, if they see that you're giving them good value, then they see the fees as being driven by value. And I've listed a whole bunch of things over there. They should be somewhat obvious. So that's the qualitative part of things that justify that quantitative premium that I just talked about. Smart scope, I mentioned about upselling. That upselling is what we call scope creation. Very nice word, but we are just basically upselling. Risk. This is the qualitative. This is something you just have to do. And again, like I said early on, the value that we bring to a project, we should never apologize for doing all those so-called extra. They're not extra; it's just part of what we do. And same thing with managing risk. This is not onerous. Getting a tight contract is not at all onerous. In fact, it actually manages your risk. And I will cycle through some of the other things later on quantitatively. Limitation of liability. Most of us don't read our contracts. Some of us do not even read our insurance policies and stuff like that. But there are lots of tools that Prodemedy and our contract allow us to exercise. So negotiating a cap is one of those ways of doing that. And there's so many ways that you can actually limit your liability. The best person to talk to, of course, is the people at the Prodemedy group. They can really advise you on even on contractual matters. Better project management. I talked about WBS. If you have a good WBS, work breakdown structure, then you know what the individual tasks are. And if you are aware of those tasks, you can manage them a little bit better. Client selection. Just be mindful of the clients that you have. Sometimes it's just better to walk away from a client that is clearly, by reputation or just by demeanor, they are predatory. They're litigious type of client, and sometimes it's just better to walk away from that. I had one very bad experience. I ended up getting sued. My spider sense. I should have listened to my spider sense. Okay, here's the quantitative part on risk, on how to manage risk. So I'm going to cycle through the types of clients. Repeat clients, you can actually, if you wish, offer a discount because they're already kind of gone past the learning curve working with you. So repeat clients are wonderful to have. I have 2 clients that at one point I worked with for decades. And my fee is competitive because I know how they work. New clients, be mindful. Got a couple of them right now. I didn't charge a premium in this particular case because the project is very, very tiny. But I'm learning it because I'm spending a lot of time setting expectations, introducing things that they should otherwise have known already, but really it's not their fault. But this is a client that I was willing to kind of cultivate. Professional experience client, a double-edged sword. It can work for you, can work against you. You can offer a discount if they have like a streamline. They know exactly what they're doing because they're professional. They have architects, engineers on board. Or sometimes professional clients can be also predatory as well too, as in they demand and they demand and they demand. They ask for a lot of extra little things. They want legal things taken care of. They want high insurance. They want a lot of reports after tons and tons of meetings. So you have to kind of think about those. Inexperienced client would be kind of like new clients. So I'm going to cycle through that. We always have to have buffer for small errors and delays, always. So you have to build into your final fee with a bit of a buffer, and there are basically 3 types of projects, and it comes with experience, sadly. But we've kind of tabulated some of the numbers based on our research and data sets. Lower risk projects, standard repetitive projects like a warehouse, they're considered low. Don't have to tack on a premium to protect yourself. I mean, how can you go wrong with a box? Well, actually, I shouldn't be so callous in calling that. Sometimes there'd be site conditions, but most urban sites, most even suburban sites are well understood. Medium risk, new project types, moderately complex sites, and even client. Consider putting a 10% premium, just protect yourself. Like I said, these are the small errors and delays that you would experience. And of course, highly specialized projects. I try not to do custom homes. I hate spending my evening in somebody's kitchen. And generally speaking, there will be at least 2 couple, and they don't always agree. They jump into the meeting with no preparation and just spending evenings after evenings trying to kind of deal with those things. And that's just a common example. So I only do custom homes for family members and super rich clients. Contingency loading is when, again, some of these are based a bit on your experience, what I call spider sense. There are certain things that you cannot control. So there are minor variation of project condition, like hidden conditions. So you might want to kind of think about some kind of contingency that you want to put in, like your own financial insurance plan. My experience is not 10%, it's a little bit less, because I try to actually outline everything ahead of time, including unexpected things. And if it doesn't happen, then it's a bonus for me, as in I get to keep that as a profit. Project-specific risk. There are some projects that have high risk renovation. You open it up, then you find 3 layers of renovation behind it. There's no way you can see through it unless you're Superman. Historical buildings, same thing. So you need to protect yourself. And the general rule is 15 to 25% tack on for renovation and historical, one on one scale and the other on the other scale. You notice that I actually bracketed that term over there. And the reason is because those should be written to your WBS, as in you have to do some destructive tests to a wall before you start, or tell the client, I can't tell you until I get to dig a hole. Well, you want to dig a hole for all the architects that are going to bid on this wall, so that we know what we are dealing with. Or you can bring in certain tools. I, believe it or not, have a moisture detector as part of my toolkit, because I don't want to be caught with conditions, and I smell when I walk in the basement for mold and stuff like that. It's important. I don't want to walk into a project blind, and sometimes you cannot do destructive tests and you're kind of stuck with that. Liability premium, there are some high-risk projects. Again, this should be factored into your WBS. So if you have a project that is going to go through many layers of regulation, and I met with a client 2 days ago that I did some work for them 20 odd years ago, maybe 25 years ago, and trying to recount to this young project director what we went through. We had to work with the landlord of the property, we had to work with the municipality, and then the conservation authority, and then at the federal level, we had to work with fisheries, and then we know that there could have been a settlement at one point, so we actually had the historical authority there, and we factored all of those things in just based on our experience on that kind of work, plus the site that we were dealing with. So you want to identify those risks as soon as you can. Again, like I said, I put this into a bracket. It really should not be an add-on premium as a percentage. It should be actually written into your WBS. And if you have the experience or your staff has the experience, factor those in. So instead of using a large number, you're actually factoring the tasks and the hours and the fees related to it. So I've given you some numbers, 3 to 5%, 10%, but then those are really just generic numbers. And sometimes those numbers are good as a check, just like those high numbers that we have in a fee table or fee chart. Yeah, more numbers to throw at you, but these are actually construction costs, not fees. So just be mindful of that distinction over there. Of course, complex projects command a high construction, higher fee, and simpler projects would get a lower fee. And I'll talk about complexity in a second. And I'm running 1 minute late, and likely will be 4 or 5 more minutes before I wrap up. Construction procurement methods, baseline is always stipulated lump sum. If you're design build, it can be a little bit cheaper if you're not leading it, because you don't have to worry too much about contract administration. Some of the design is actually very simplistic. Or it could be a huge premium, like the Skydome. Skydome was design build. Sadly, my boss at the time, Rod Robbie, did not tag on that premium, and he paid a price for that. Construction management, because of the multiple packages that are going there should be a premium on it, 5 to 15%. And again, like I said, I bracketed this, meaning it should be part of your WBS, and I'm giving you these numbers as a check. PPP, you're at risk. You're dealing with municipalities that don't, and even provincial governments and even federal governments, and do not hesitate suing you if something goes wrong. And you have partners as architects. We have to always partner up. We have big conglomerates that are willing to also sue you. So make sure that your risk is managed using that premium that I just talked about. Building design complexity. So the first grouping is all these very complex buildings where you should really be thinking about a premium fee. And again, it's bracketed, meaning you should be thinking about that in your WBS. The baseline is office buildings. They should not say basement, it should say baseline, no premium. And then anything beyond that, you should be able to actually give back some discounts. Warehousing is a good one, big box. The reason why I put education is historically, and sadly, most school boards have a templated design, or they would hire you for 5 or 6 schools, and the only thing that you do is change the site plan, especially in smaller municipalities, and this is unique to my experience. So this doesn't maybe apply to a private school, but some of the school boards. I'm going to skip to the quizzes. So reasonable and fair fees, I'm mindful of time, 4 minutes beyond schedule, but we'll be fine. I'm doing such a good job, I hope there will be no Q&A. This is partly from the OAA and partly from just my experience. to come up with a fair and reasonable fee, you have to have very clear scope definition. In other words, every activity is already accounted for and included, and hence that two statement right there. We must always price up for the value that we bring. You have a very specialized skill set. Put that into your formulation. And of course, manage those risks either to your WBS, as in, this is extra scope because of the nature of the project, or just simply it's a kind of client. It's very hard to quantify them in the WBS, so you qualify it by adding a certain percentage, and I've given you those numbers. And that's really what qualified based selection is all about. The IC has been pushing it. The federal government is also trying to push it. And if you do not know what QBS is, try to find out because they look at things above and beyond just fees alone. So concluding very quickly, can AI help create reasonable and fair fees? The answer is yes, because all those three factors, the three grouping of factors can actually be put into an AI app. And the RIBA fee calculator is one. Sadly, we have no access to it. And there are at least three other commercial ones that is in the marketplace. One of them is called Architecture Fee Calculator. Another one is Fee Calcs. And the last one on my list is something called Micro Estimates. Sadly, my level of confidence in those products are not very, very good. I've kicked the tires. And I've not been too impressed. The RIBA fee calculator I have no access to. I'm just dying to know a British architect that would give me his or her, her meaning I know a UK architect. She didn't agree to it. Give me my login, her login ID and password. Didn't get that. So I decided I'm gonna start my own app. So that's the app that I am working on, building up the database, the scripting and stuff like that. And it's based on scope, value, and risk. How creative. Scope, value, and risk. What are the algorithm that we are trying to build into this app? All the things that I just talked about: WBS, the hours, the sum, the expertise factor, the price up, speed, positioning, clients. Risk type, procurement, complexity, and again, they're in bracketed because those things can be included in your WBS. So fees are a complex formulation that deserves some intellectual vigor beyond looking up a two-dimensional table in a few minutes. I've talked to this already just now. It's actually my conclusion. And fees are the financial reasons that fund our creativity. And once you set it up once, and with automation and AI, you would have a historical database that will serve your practice indefinitely. My database is about 30 years old, and I am actually able to now leverage that into management consulting. Thank you. We are 7 minutes past, so we only have 23 minutes for Q&A. Hopefully I've done a good enough job that there are not too many questions. Just want to remind you there's a survey that you have to do.
Yes.
And then we're going to go into the QA very, very shortly because I want to get off the screen. And these are my contact information. Get a screenshot or ask for a copy of that. And I am now back. No confidential information that I shared.
No, you're good. Yeah.
Took up 8 minutes of your time. I'm sorry.
No problem. We can go a little bit over for questions if there are quite a few, so no trouble at all. So again, if you have not already, please put your questions for Yew-Thong in the Q&A window. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. And there are a few questions already in the box. So just to begin, someone has asked about the document that you were mentioning that was commissioned by the OAA, whether there's a link to that still available. We can maybe search for that on our end and put it in the chat, but could you remind us the author or the title of that document?
are we referring to the Mastering the Business of Architecture
I think
by
by
David
Store
Stone?
or Stone? Stone, right?
David Stone, yeah, David
Okay,
Stone. So you can
David
Google
Stone.
search it and it'll come up.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
so
called
we will
Mastering the Business of Architecture.
mastery the business of architecture.
Yeah,
Okay,
and it's
perfect. So
free.
we'll try to.
Yeah.
Great. So we'll get a link to that in the chat. A few people have asked whether you will be receiving the slides. So yes, we will be sending the slides out along with the survey if you were wondering following the presentation. Okay. So someone here
David
is,
Tiny
I'm
asking
sorry?
about Jira. Hi, David.
Oh,
Jira is actually a all-purpose software. Yes, it is cumbersome. It's not user-friendly.
mm,
So thank you for suggesting that core BQE is better, and I somewhat agree. Yes, thank you, David.
right.
Not a question.
Um,
David is a friend.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Yew-Thong, just sorry to interrupt, but the attendees can't see the questions in the Q&A
Oh,
window. Only you
okay,
can see them. So
okay.
so I'll read. I'll just read
Please
David's
do.
question out
Please do.
again, just so that others know. So David wrote, "I would be interested to see which app others are using. We have used Jira for the past 5 years and find it not very user friendly. We have recently decided to change to Core BQE." So that's some suggestion maybe for others in the audience. Um, did you want to read through the rest of the questions, Yutong, or should I?
I should do that. I wasn't
Okay,
aware that they couldn't read it
no
because
problem,
some of
no
these
problem.
people are actually people that I know.
Oh,
William
okay.
Forrest Guru was my student at one point. Amazing, amazing architect now. It is understood that the IIC has published the 2019 fee guide. However, is there a general guide that breaks down construction value? Either the yardsticks BS means this allows us to use IIC guides. The fees are broken down by construction value. William, I told you about the REIC cost guide. It's online. It's very, very simple to use. If you're not an REIC member, I can sell you one. And it's only available to REIC members. And if you're a member, it's free, and you can go in and do as many projects as you want. It's kind of like a Class D estimate in one sense, almost a Class D, and you save yourself $10,000 or your practice $10,000. I've taken it for a run when it was in beta stage. Very user friendly. This was developed by Hanscom. Susan Neal is the partner in charge at that time. So yeah, so again, Google, join the membership first because it's behind a paywall, and then you can get this REIC construction cost guide developed by Hanscom, and Hanscom has an amazing database, and I trust those values. And they divided by region, by the way. Okay, let me just cycle through. Oh, there's quite a few questions, so I need to spend less time talking to my friends. You anonymous attendee, you mentioned that you have recently used AI tools in your practice, which have helped improve your margins and increase your productivity. Can you share some of the specific AI tools that your firm has used for design and or productivity? There are quite a few out there, and it's escaping me for a moment.
So Yutong, we've put your email addresses in the chat.
Okay,
So if someone wants to contact you directly about that, they
please
can.
do. I'll be more than
Yeah.
happy to share it. Yeah, I'll be more than happy. We use it as a pre-design and a concept design tool. And I actually gave a little talk about a month ago at U of T, and happy to talk about that as well too. Orlando Baroni, uh, thank you for the informative presentation. Any thoughts on convincing the client to pay you possibly on a time basis to help them develop their own scope? Often encounter pushback on this point. Clients either expect you to understand the scope implicitly or somehow accurately account for scope development in a lump sum fee. So the simple tool is document 6 or 600, I forgot which one. It breaks it down, telling you that programming is not part of your scope. Simple as that. And we want to use document 6 or 600 always, and just simply, hey, this is extra. Budget and program is the owner's responsibility. Simple as that. And that's what I do. And then what you may want to do is you've done a program before, bring that big fat document and put it in front of them. This is what you're paying for. And we typically ask to get paid for programming, because at one stage before the big American companies invaded Canada, we were doing a lot of university labs, and we always produce a big fat program, and they see the value in that. And when they look into it, they realize, oh, there's a lot of work, should be paid. Open communications, basically. Okay, I'm going to move on because I think I need to. Anonymous attendee, could you please suggest any reputable AI courses you suggest to take to stay on top of AI for architecture design? The RAIC and the OAA have tons and tons of AI courses and seminars. But there's one specifically coming out of private enterprise in the States. And this gentleman, I believe, is from SOM, New York. We may have missed that course already. But if you send me an email, I'll be happy to kind of dig it up. And there may be a subsequent course. This is private. This is not RAIC or OAA, meaning it's for profit and it's not cheap. It's quite expensive. I highly recommend that course. Henry, thank you. We'll be happy to use it when ready. Do not know what that means.
That was in reference to the tool that you're developing.
Oh, okay. Quiz, questions and answers. Okay, I'm going to skip that because we didn't do that. Can you comment on the fees mentioned upset short for upper limit set? Don't quite understand that question, sadly. So
I think they're asking about the upper limit set method, the fee method. That's called upper limit set. Sure.
Oh, okay. We don't typically do that. It's an upset fee, meaning there is a cap to it. So I really do not have many experiences with that. So I cannot really comment on that. What I typically do is I would have a base fee and then the extras on top of it. That's what I typically do. So I'm the wrong person to ask that. I don't think that method is used too much nowadays. But I'm going to skip to that, and I'll be happy to take an email, and then maybe we can have a phone discussion on that. Do you use AI? Do you see the use of AI changing architecture practice and fee drastically in the next 5 years? The answer is yes. This is Stella Ho, but not replacing humans and all this doomsday prediction. I've been through 3 cycles of it. If you cannot guess my age, I can tell you what I've been through. I started my career drawing by hand with something called parallel rule. And then we had something called CAD, and everyone's like, oh, CAD is replacing draftspeople. Didn't happen. And then about 20 years ago, we had something called BIM that's going to replace us. No, did not. If anything else, I was able to leverage that. And then the last couple of years, AI came into our practice. Last summer was that big rush. And this summer is going to just even get, it's going to change the way we do things because it's a new tool set. There's always, and in my little talk at U of T, I assembled 4 other architects from big firms, and none of us were fearful with that tool. We know we have to learn that tool because it's a concept called human in the loop that will never replace humanity with many things. I know I sound like a preacher, but this is my 3rd cycle of technology. So Stella, keep the faith. Don't switch into something more lucrative or easier like medicine or something like that. That there's always a need for people. Ali Shams, what is the best model for coding on a single family home project? As this is a very competitive market. For architects, the BCN numbers can also offer services. Go back to the value chain that I just talked about. Brand yourself, do all the things that I talked about in terms of what you have to do. Now, you may not win the first few commissions, but once you develop a reputation that Ali Sham is the guy that you want to go to for custom homes, not YT Leong, then you'll be fine. So yeah, please think about the value proposition always. BCIN, just by the nature of what they do and how they do things, it's a bit of a race to the bottom. And if you want to participate in that, okay. But as an architect, you don't want to be part of that ecosystem. I'm so sorry for being so rude. Those are bottom feeders. Large clients want a matrix of pricing rates based on project types and complexity. For a master service agreement, is there a different approach or other consideration that needs to be considered when offering this to clients, and how can companies differentiate themselves in a structured submission? My experience with that is typically it's just one of the appendix that they want. There's still the ability to actually market and brand yourself. They just want to have that as a check. I've been through 5 or 6 big, massive projects. If I mention it, and you know what I'm talking about, you know which project I'm talking about. But we have to provide all of those things, and after the fact, and this will all run by professional project management company that over the 2 or 3 years on the project, at the end you get to know them very, very well. I said, do you even look at this? And the answer is no. It's just a checklist. So I say share them. It is onerous, I would say, but it just only shows that you know what you're doing. It demonstrates your competence a lot better. Because 10 more minutes, I think we're okay. So hopefully I've answered that. Sahar Yusuf, have you found that percentage-based fees sometimes don't accurately reflect the actual level of effort? 100%. When compared to an hourly-based approach. If you can get an hourly-based approach, it protects you, especially if your hourly rate, the OAA, or maybe I'm wrong, I don't remember now. They always ask for a multiplier of 2.5 to 3 times payroll. And that protects your, quote unquote, your salary, what you pay yourself. It covers all your operational costs, software, rent, a car, all those kind of things, and a nice safety margin for profit, which typically for an architect, and I want to be arrogant for a second, I don't get out of bed unless I know that I'm going to get a 20% margin on my projects. Otherwise, I'll play the stock market. Just kidding. But every respectable architect should be aiming at 20% or higher. What's the current percentage professional fees based on current market? Yeah, hard to answer that in this context, but always happy to have a chat with you. And by the way, both the OAA and the IC actually have practice advisors. You can talk to them. Go to them. You'll be amazed what you can learn. Maybe not officially, but once you get somebody talking on the other end, they are able to actually share some interesting things. And the OAA has a really good team of professional advisors. Yeah, so do talk to them. The OAA is there to service the membership. Okay, we got another one from Henry Ollie. Sorry, I don't know why BCIN exists. It should not and should be abolished. Hallelujah, brother. I agree with you. In some parts of the world, Germany, Japan, they have different classification of architect, but you have to be an architect. And even a small little house or kitchen addition must be designed by an architect. And membership can push for that. Don't look at the OAA as your enemy. The OAA is your friend, and they control the Architects Act. So, yeah. Okay, I think that's the end of that. I got 5 minutes to spare.
Perfect. Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Yew-Thong, for that, especially for that shout out about the OAA. We appreciate that. I have included a link to the practice advisory hotline, so that Yew-Thong was mentioned. So if anyone would like to contact them, if you have any questions, that link is there and available for you. So I have just a few closing announcements for the end of this presentation. First of all, again, a big thank you to Yew-Thong for this excellent presentation, and to all of our attendees for your participation and your engagement today. Um, for those who are seeking continuing education and learning hours for this webinar, again, the OAA will record your participation on your OAA transcript, so there is no need for individual reporting on your part. We just kindly ask for your patience at this busy time of year as we process and confirm the accreditation of your hours within the next few weeks. Again, attendees will be receiving a copy of the presentation slides, as well as a link to a survey to submit your feedback for today's speaker. Again, we and our speakers highly value this feedback, so please do complete the survey once you receive the link. Next week, in honor of Earth Day, we have 2 climate action webinars taking place. The first is on Wednesday, April 22nd, and that one is titled Building Collaborative Relationships, a Case Study in CLT. And the second is on Thursday, April 23rd, and that one is titled Collaboration for Circular Construction and Reuse. So again, both of these are climate action webinars, and they are also both 10% off for OAA members. So if you need your climate action hours, that's a great opportunity. So be sure to sign up for those if you haven't already. And with that, I will thank you, Thong, once again for this presentation. Thank you to all of our attendees, and I wish you all a pleasant remainder of your day. Thanks very much.
Bye.